I just heard the millionaire director of a cryptocurrency firm dramatically declare that although he may be facing criminal charges, although he may end up in prison, he will always defiantly represent the refined ideal of the decentralization of monetary policy, the decentralization of money. How is it that so many millions of people around the world, from different cultural backgrounds, different languages, living in very different political contexts, how is it that so many millions of people have come to regard decentralization as a virtue? When there were allegations of police corruption in the United States of America, when there were allegations of police racism, one of the reactions I heard most often in the mainstream media was that the police should be decentralized, that there should be community policing that is locally run, locally operated, locally governed. The great irony here is that the American tradition of how to respond to, how to intervene in cases of systemic police corruption has always been instead to centralize policing. So, for example, the police force in New Orleans is found to be corrupt, it's found to be incompetent, and to some extent racist. Racism is always a factor when you're talking about Louisiana. And what are they going to do? Are they going to break the police force down into smaller units susceptible to more corruption with a shorter chain of command? Are they going to decentralize it? Or do you have the city cops taken over and run directly by the state cops, directly run by the governor's office? Do you have the local cops taken over and run by the federal authorities? Something more like the FBI. Canada has a long history of the same thing. Whether it's a local city or a local province that's found that it can't operate its own police force, the solution always is to centralize, not decentralize, to have the federal police force take over those duties. Now, there are currency crises around the world. There are governments struggling with monetary policy. And this discourse we have coming out of the cryptocurrency subculture, I don't see or hear anyone suggesting that the solution right now for Sri Lanka would be to decentralize currency, decentralize monetary policy, or decentralize government debt. I don't see anyone suggesting that Pakistan should decentralize the work of its national bank, however you want to put it. It's very peculiar. It's very peculiar that decentralization has come to be regarded as a virtue, as something the hoi polloi demands, in contexts as radically unrelated as interventions in police corruption and this so-called cryptocurrency investment scheme phenomenon. All right? When you have centralization, you have accountability. There is a centralized authority that is responsible for controlling inflation. So if inflation is a problem, we know who to blame. And right now in the United States of America, everyone does indeed blame Joe Biden. Do you actually think the economy would be improved, the economic system be improved, if nobody knew who to blame? Now, in the United States of America, this might be harder to visualize. In the United Kingdom, easier. You can have many banks issuing currency, many national policies. You can have a National Bank of Scotland, you can have a National Bank of Wales, you can have many different aesthetic forms of the pound sterling note, each of which is equally legal tender to the others, but they may not be governed by the same very visible hand. Japan is going through an economic crisis right now. I haven't heard anyone suggest that decentralization would be the solution for this. Every so often, the CIA is accused of assassinating someone or funding some unsavory terrorist, and the CIA are able to say pretty plausibly, it wasn't us who did it. Or if you think it was us, go ahead and prove it. And that is because the CIA has a very long tradition. Despite the meaning of the letter C in CIA, they have a long tradition of decentralization of authority, which is linked to the doctrine of plausible deniability. So you don't know who made the decision. You don't know who's responsible. Do you think that traffic would be better governed if it were decentralized? If each neighborhood had its own set of standards for what it means to pass a driving test? If each neighborhood both set the speed limits and enforced the speed limits and collected fines, each in their own peculiar way? If enforcement as well as decision-making were decentralized, do you think that sewage treatment and the production of clean, reliable water for you to take a shower in and drink from the tap, do you think that would be improved through decentralization? Finally, what happens when you decentralize education? I'll tell you what happens. Religious fanatics take over, right? When you have centralized education, you have a government bureaucracy, however corrupt, however soulless, with a clear hierarchy. And if the quality of education is poor, you know who to blame. And if it's racist, or it's unequal or corrupt in some other way, you know who to blame. And when you decentralize education, then some local Mormon crackpot religious leader, some local Muslim religious leader, anyone can set up and operate their own little school board, whether it's on the basis of a neighborhood, a religion, or what have you, right? Then we're in a downward spiral where we both don't have compatible standards across the sector and society. And when something goes wrong fundamentally, we don't know who to blame. Cryptocurrency is riding a wave of public credulity, the same wave of public credulity that responded to the death of George Floyd by demanding decentralization of policing. At some point, people are going to have to stop and reflect on what the meaning of decentralization is and why it would be that local and small scale would necessarily be morally superior to something centralized and standardized, whether we are talking about democracy itself, decision-making, the establishment of standards, or enforcement.